Morning, Paul.
Morning.
Look at that shine.
This is my 1980 Honda CBX Super Sport. Probably start with a little bit of history for those who don't know how this came to be. Honda came out with the CB750 in '79 that just blew the whole motorcycle community away. But then they turned their focus to cars. And during the early 70s, they had good bikes, but there wasn't anything real exciting there. They came out with a Goldwing in '75 that was supposed to be a sports bike, but it immediately became a touring bike. So they decided they needed to do something to cause a little excitement and figure out how they could gain back and show off their technical engineering skills. So they tapped Soichiro Iramajiri, who was an engineer who had done a lot of their race bikes. He was responsible for the RC166, which was a legendary 250 cc's, 6-cylinder, 18,000 RPM redline, 60 horsepower, and would do about 149 miles an hour. I mean, a phenomenal bike. So they tapped him to come up with something special to really get back into the market and show people what they could do. They actually did prototype a 4-cylinder 1,000 cc bike during the development process, but decided 6 just had too much bling and they wanted to make a big statement to the world. So in 1979, they came out with the CBX, 6-cylinder, 6 carburetors, 24 valves, about 100 horsepower, plus or minus. They actually gave Cycle magazine exclusive rights to a story. They had a 19-page article about the CBX where they took it all apart and went into a lot of technical detail, and they were just blown away by it. It was just phenomenal. It produced the quickest quarter-mile time of 11.55 at 117 miles an hour, and the highest top speed of 136 miles an hour that they'd ever tested on a production bike. They were quite impressed. It does have a couple of features that are interesting. There are no down tubes. The engine's a stressed member, and they didn't want any down tubes in front to block the view of that gorgeous engine. That's an interesting approach to their design. Everyone comments about how wide the engine is, but it's only about 1.5 to 2 inches wider than a 750. They took the alternator and the ignition and put it on a jack shaft behind the engine so that they could save that width. But the 750, of course, goes up and then comes in and then up with the cylinders, whereas this one just keeps on going up on the outside, which is why it looks so wide. But it is actually not that much extra wide considering what the engine is. The initial response was fabulous. People just thought this was unbelievable. You know, we'd gone from singles to twins to 4 cylinders and now to 6, and you know, where is this going to end up? But the handling wasn't all that great. It was big, heavy, and very complex, obviously. So although they sold about 25,000 in the first year, in the second year, in 1980, they sold 3,000. And then in 81 and 82, they actually changed it completely, made it a touring bike with bags and a fairing and a monoshock rear suspension. I'd seen that article in Cycle magazine. I read it back when it first came out and loved the bike, was fascinated by the complexity. Over the years, back in my mind, boy, it'd be nice to have one of those someday. Somewhere around 2009, actually on kind of a whim, I did a little search on Craigslist for CBX, and there was one in Salem. Had 17,000 miles, all stock, you know, good shape, ran well. So I went down with a friend and bought it, loaded it on the trailer and brought it home. Didn't need much. It had a Corbin gunfighter seat on it, but he had the original seat, which I immediately put on. And did the usual. I had to go through the brake calipers and the master cylinders. I don't know why people don't change their brake fluid more often, but they always need attention. You know, filter, oil, valve adjustments, interesting. 24 valves, it takes some time. And the valve cover doesn't quite come out. You've got to take these brackets off and drop the engine by about 1/4 inch. So you have just enough room to get that valve cover out. Sinking the carburetors is a challenge, but it doesn't have to be done very often. So other than that, I mean, I've done a lot of cleaning and polishing and lubing. Just, you know, I do my usual, just going through top to bottom, but I just loved it. I rode it 2,000-3,000 miles a year for the first 4 or 5 years. I just couldn't get enough of it. It's quick, obviously, but also smooth. Inline 6 is inherently perfectly balanced, both primary and secondary. You've got pistons going up and down and in the middle to keep the primary down, and with a 270-degree crank, the secondary is balanced as well. So it's extremely smooth, very quick, very comfortable. I've done all-day rides on it, and it just fits me really well. And it's been reliable. I've had zero trouble. It's got 31,000 miles on it now. Nothing major, the usual, battery and tires and that sort of thing, but it's been a really reliable bike. I just love it. It's lots of fun. The guy I bought it from someone in California, and he claimed it was all original. My biggest evidence toward that is over here on the side at the front of the tank, the paint's a little thin. And in a factory where you're just cranking out bikes, that could happen. But if you're doing a restoration, you're not going to have that kind of paint job for restoration. So that's just one little clue I have that it really is the original. And I really haven't changed much. I did change the brake lines. I put on stainless steel brake lines. But other than that, and tires and battery, those sorts of things, it's all original. Yeah, there's no tuning. The only thing you really have to do is syncing them occasionally. I can't remember the last time I did it. It's been a while. I mean, I don't ride it as much as I used to, partly because I have a lot more bikes, spread the riding out, but it doesn't take too long. Now, an interesting thing about this tank, though, is it is so flat that as you're filling it, you think you're full, but you can squeeze another gallon in because you have to get this whole width across there. And so I'm very patient. I know which gas stations have nozzles that don't just turn on and turn off suddenly. They did have a European sport kit, which had lower bars, the same aluminum, but lower, and rear set pegs and controls. And I have a friend who's got a 1980 that got the European bars and rear sets on it. But no, this was the standard US. One of the challenges with bikes in 1980 is the federal government decided that they were going to try and push that 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. So all bikes from that era have 85-mile-an-hour speedometers. Originally it was 150-mile-an-hour speedometer. So they did do some improvements in 1980, all focused on the handling. The steering head's different. They beefed up the swing arm and the pivot. There are different shocks that have rebound and damping adjustability, and their air forks, you put 10 psi of air in the forks to help. So supposedly it does handle a little better. They did detune it a little. Center cylinders were getting a little hot, and I think there were some European regulations or something. So it's not quite the full 103 horsepower, but they added to the mid-range, which is what you use anyway. It's still a really quick bike, even by today's standards. It gets up and goes. Parts availability is another thing that people wonder about with older bikes, but it really isn't too bad. There's a guy down in Florida who bought up all sorts of stock and bought a lot of the bikes, and he's got pretty much everything you could want, up to including complete bikes. I bought a couple of things from him, like the owner's manual. Didn't have an owner's manual, so I bought one of those. He said, well, do you want perfect or good or very good or so-so? So I got the very good. I wasn't ready to pay for perfect. I mean, they're not cheap, but at least they're available. And there are a couple of websites that specialize in the CBX stuff. Tim's and Randak has a lot of the old Honda parts and things, and quite a community out there. It's really become quite the cult bike. If I were to sell it today, I'm guessing I would get somewhere between 3 to 4 times what I paid for it. And just the last 5-8 years, it has just gone crazy. The first year, 79, there was silver and red, and then in 80, there was the red and black. And then when they went to the touring bike, in 81, 82, there was silver and white, but those were the touring. And it's a fabulous touring bike. I mean, it's like the Goldwing. It's very smooth, plenty of woof to get you going, 2 up or with luggage or even a trailer. I think make a fabulous touring bike. I'm not dragging pegs, so from my perspective, it's fine. They did do a couple of interesting things. On the side of the crankcase is angled, and even the crank itself is beveled a little bit on the ends so that you can get a little more clearance when you're leaning over. The carburetor, the bank of carburetors is at angle so that you get a little more leg room, so otherwise your knees would be hitting the carburetors in the front here. So they did a lot of things. I think it's just a pretty bike. The lines, everything about it, I just think is gorgeous. And then there's that engine. And of course you can't go anywhere without people, oh, I used to have one of those. Oh, I wished I'd had one of those. I knew a guy that had one of those, Because a lot of people don't ride them. They buy them and restore them perfect and then put them in their living room or in a museum. And I've put about 16,000 miles on it since I got it. It's done nothing to it, just rode it. I mean, I clean it. It's been waxed so many times. It helps with the shine. But I've really had very little maintenance. Love it. It's a lot of fun.
Bye, Paul. Thanks very much for watching, guys. This has been another tale from the cul-de-sac. Please remember to subscribe and click the little bell and you'll get a notice whenever I release a new video, usually every Sunday morning and sometimes during the week.